basically there are key factors. First, customer. Basically, customer will log in into the website and he will buy the products whatever he wants. Then once the products he selected, then he will go and check out and order the products. So basically, let's assume this is our basic business plan. So now what we have to do, we have to start designing the database. So why we have to start designing? Because each customer information, either transaction, product or any order, you have to be stored into the table. So that's why once you get the business requirements, then based on that you have to be start developing the business database designing for the specific business requirements. So let's assume, let's go with the next slide. Then basically when you start the database designing, you have to be identify the entities. So entities is nothing but name or maybe things or products or anything. So here we have to be find out the first entities. What are the entities for our business? So the business is customer. The name is the customer is an entity. Then once the customer is going to be buy a product. So as I mentioned, the product is a thing. So which means either name or things are considered as an entity. So before you start any database designing, first you have to get the business requirements. Then in the business requirements, you have to be find out what are the entities. So entities is nothing but either name or thing or any the static fact. So which means we have a customer here. Then the product is also our entity. So when you start buying the product, the customer will go and online log in and buy the product. So here we found out two are the entities. I'm just giving you all these basic examples and basic knowledge. So these are not going to be asking in the interview, but what I want to do is I want you to know the basic concepts from the scratch. So then only you can understand and you will career will be strong, and that's what I believe. So that's why I'm going with the basic concepts too. So if you start any database designing or in future if you start trying to do any architecture position, then you have to be consider all these basics. So now then once you've done the product, again the product is going to be uh, whenever the customer he will select multiple products. So then once he selected the all products, then he will do the checkout. After he done the checkout, then he will order the entire products. So once order is completed, then automatically shipping to the customer address or he will receive the products immediately. So this is the flow of our the basic business. So based on that, you have to start designing the data flow and database design table. So to do that, first you have to be analyze it. What are the flow of your business? So here, as I mentioned, customer will go to select the products and products, multiple products will be added into the checkout. Then the customer will buy the products. Then the products will be delivered to the customer, either home or in person. So this is the basic of our flow. So now, as I mentioned, when you start designing the database, you have to be identify the entities. So entities are customer entity, product entity, and order entity. So these are the three entities for this requirement. But in future, let's assume if you start a school business, then what happen? So school, the students will join the school and the teacher will teach the school. At the same time, the school, the teacher or student information will be stored into the database. So based on that, what are the entities we found? Student, teacher, and also you can go and add the class because each student has their own class. So you can find the three entities here basic for the school business. So this is I'm talking about the basic entity, but when you start with the designing the large business requirements, then your entities will be increasing and you will get a lot of tables designing. So but let's focus on the small business requirements here. So now when I talk about the entity relationship diagram, as I mentioned here, we just found out these are the entities we need for our business requirement: customer, product, and order. So now we are going to be furthermore step that entity relationship diagram. So which means, as when you see the diagram here, you have a relationship. The customer entity is relation with the product entity, because then only the customer will go and select the products. So the product is related to the order entity, which means the product entity is related to the order, then only all the products will be getting into the order checkout list. Then again we have a relation to the order entity to the customer, then customer will buy the product and he will get into the home address. So based on that business requirements, we will get into the further more details into the database diagram side. So the customer, so when you talk about the customer, what are the information you will store in the database? Basically customer name, customer address, and phone number. So these are the customer entity. Then once you customer will select the order, then order number of orders will be go and subtotal of the quantity, then order will be shipping to the customer. So basically there is a relationship between all these entity relationship diagrams, so which is called entity relationship diagram. So each is the entity and each entity is related to each other, then we called as entity relationship diagram. Basically this ER diagrams, whenever the people are talking ER diagrams in any organization, whenever you get a job, or whenever the people are talking about ERD, which means entity relationship diagram. So basically this is more important when you start a new business requirements, and if anyone wants to implement the database designing for the business requirement, definitely they have an entity relationship diagram for each office, because this is the basic foundation. Then only everybody can understand what are the tables we are going to get and what are the requirements we are going to be gathered for the business and organization. So this is the basic, and when you get the interview, they might ask, this is because this is a basic fundamental question: have you ever worked with the entity relationship diagram, or do you know anything about entity relationship diagram? The answer is yes. That so how could you know that? That means is we used to work and implement the large number of queries. You will come to know what exactly the queries and what exactly. So but basically if we work with a lot of queries, so based on the entity relationship diagram, we implemented large number of queries and we implemented large development work. Then only see, if I see the diagram, then only I know which table is related to the which table. So table is nothing but entity, but you will come to know more details about the entity and table very shortly. So basically when I see the entity diagram, ER diagram, then only I know which entity is related to the other entity. So because we have a just only four, that's why we can easily identify. But when you go into the big organization, we must have at least 40 to 50 entity relationships. So you cannot remember all those entity relationships. So basically what they do is they will design the entity relationship diagrams. That is not your job, but the architect will does all those information on the entity. So based on the diagram, you will start developing the queries. So select statements or tables or all those, you will start developing work. So basically entity relationship diagram is the more important to start the developing process. And then when you start when you identify the entity relationship diagram, then you have to be start designing the database. So basically how we designing the database, everybody knows that basic table. So table is, each table will store the